Is it ready? Okay. All right, and welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Academic Yak, the podcast where we yak about academic stuff. As you can see, we have another new guest this week, as always, and we're super excited about tonight's episode. Just a few quick reminders, as we always do, to start off every episode. If you want to know about future episodes, then check us out on Twitter. The username is @yak_pod. That's where we post updates and reminders about upcoming episodes, and also where we post the uploaded YouTube links. With that in mind, we also record every episode that we do live here on Twitch, so that way we can upload them onto our YouTube channel. That is just Academic Yak on YouTube. Go ahead over there, watch some of our previous episodes if you're new here or if you've missed a few, and let us know if you like the content that you're seeing. If you're hanging out with us today live, our chat is open. We love to accept any questions that you may have throughout the duration of the podcast. I'll keep an eye on it and try to bring in your questions where they make sense. And yeah, if you're interested in being on the podcast, as always, we have a Gmail account, academicyakpod@gmail.com. Reach out to us there or on Twitter to let us know what it is that you do and what you would like to talk about, and we will get you set up for your own episode. But without further ado, we have our new guest today, and I am going to let Emma introduce themselves.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I'm Emma Larson. Right now I'm at the University of Arkansas working on a Sociology Master's of Arts.
Nice. No, not me saying your name wrong every single time I've talked about you.
You know, it's like 90% there, which means it's close enough.
Awesome. But now we know. Well, I'm excited that you're here today. You are the first guest that is on our podcast that's not related to me and or not someone that is, in close friendship with me. I've met you a handful of times now at some protests here in our city, which has been really interesting. And yeah, you seemed interested in the podcast, so you get to be our first guest to me and the podcast, which is exciting. Yeah.
Entirely honored.
Yeah, you have a perfect personality to be hanging out with me today. So let's talk about how you got here. How did you get into your master's program?
You know, an interesting question, and you're going to listen to me ramble for a second. So I did high school in Hot Springs, Arkansas, and then I thought I was going to go to the University of Arkansas. My sister went to the University of Arkansas. She's a couple years older than me. And she was like, if you come up here, I'll show you where all the cool stuff is, and you can hang out with the cool kids. And I was like, yeah, I'm into it. So I went to the University of Arkansas, and I was convinced I was going to get a bachelor's in psychology, because I was really interested in, like, the human psyche and how mostly, and it's really interesting, I was mostly interested in identity formation. So, like, how we decide to identify ourselves. And the more I was getting into that topic as I started at the university, the more I had psychology professors, and I took an intro to sociology course where that professor told me, you might just do sociology instead. It's much more macro level. It's on a much larger scale, but you could look at the exact same questions that you're already interested in. And so I kind of played around with that, and I ended up sticking into the sociology program to get my bachelor's. For 4 years spent at the University of Arkansas, I did a Bachelor of Arts in sociology, got bored, realized I needed more hours, and picked up a degree in anthropology, got bored, realized I needed more hours if I wanted to spend a full 4 years at the university. So, and it was paid for. I was very lucky. I had some grants and some scholarships that were paying for my education for 4 years. So I also picked up a Bachelor of Arts in political science. And then I knew I wanted to continue schooling because I really wanted to get into a PhD program. But I didn't know which social science to pick because I had sort of given myself too many options.
Yeah.
And so I kind of went with what felt true to me, which was my original interest in sociology and that idea of how we choose to identify ourselves and, like, what that means to us. So that's how I kind of ended up, like, sticking into a sociology program. And then I was completely in love with the faculty at the University of Arkansas. I'd already been there for 4 years, interacting daily with all of these professors who seemed very interested in my continued education. So, stuck around for another 2 years to do a Master of Arts, and I'm going into my second year now.
Awesome.
So,
Yeah, I actually, people who have watched the podcast before have heard me say this, but I started out as an education major, biochemistry, then education, and then ended up in public relations. And then, like you, was like, this isn't really enough, and added the communication. And then, this isn't really enough, and I added a minor in sociology. Mm-hmm. And so, even though I had a minor in sociology, I ended up taking mostly anthropology-based courses. Yep. Just because of the way that they overlapped, you kind of had that flexibility. Yep. And I loved the classes that I took over there, and I almost ended up going for a master's in that. Just considered it for a little bit of time, and stuck with the communication degree just because I like looking at the messages specifically and not so much the construct behind them. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I resonate a little bit with that side of the social scientific world just because I took just an intro to sociology class to fulfill a requirement, and I was like, it's actually really cool. But for people who are not from that world and always hear people talk about sociologists and anthropologists, they always put them together and they're not the same. They're not the same. And they always think that they're archaeologists, and those are not the same either. So tell us a little bit about what it is to be studying sociology.
Okay. So I'll definitely probably relate it a lot of times to anthropology because I know that people make that connection. Both study people. There's also a little bit of overlap between sociology and psychology. Psychology is the study of individual level mental processes and things like that. And then anthropology and sociology, I think, are a little bit more combined. Anthropology is technically the study of all human culture, artifacts, things like that. Sociology is the study of society. So it's more about human organizations and processes than about the physical things that hold them together. There's definitely a lot of overlap between anthropology and sociology. We say a lot of times that there's two sides to sociological research. One is quantitative, which is very based in numbers, hard data, things like that. And there's a qualitative side of sociology research, which can be interviews and field work. And those two same things are the main ways that anthropologists collect their data. The difference is in how we would draw conclusions about our data. So anthropologists will take whatever data they come up with at face value, and they won't explain it at all. They'll let the people they're talking to explain their own data. Mm-hmm. So they might go to a group of people, ask them some questions, and then whatever information they come back with, they'll ask those people to explain the answers they've come up with. Meanwhile, a sociologist will sort of get to put their own spin on it through an objective scientific lens. Objectivity, obviously, very hard to get completely right, but it's the goal of sociology is to stay a little bit more objective and to sort of be able to put the answers into a context that the people who you're interviewing might not be able to see for themselves.
Yeah, and I think that that's where, you get into social sciences. Honestly, we're all very similar in that way. Because as you're explaining that, I'm like, okay, but what can I make as the definitive difference between that and communication? Because that's essentially how I describe communication too. But I think the main difference is communication, we're looking specifically at the messages that are shared between people, right, groups, individuals, organizations, and their public, however, it's the actual messages, whereas you guys are studying more of sometimes just the behaviors and the things that are going on.
Sometimes the behaviors, sometimes the symbols, sometimes the social construct. It's I would say messages are perhaps a very small percentage of that, right? But we definitely try to look much broader across every kind of human communication there is and every kind of human interaction, whether there's, explicit communication or not.
Yeah, I think one of the most popular theories that are shared between sociology and communication, and a lot of people aren't really sure which one to actually give it to because sociology came first, so it started there, but it's really a communication-based construct, is symbolic interactionism, right? This is one that is shared between our two disciplines uniquely, that communication doesn't always share with other social science disciplines so well. We kind of take from each discipline because we're so new. But that theory specifically, I know, is one that we share with sociology people a lot. And you'll see it in publications that are based in sociology and communication nearly equally. But anyways, that's all besides the point. So now you're here. and you've worked your way through finding what it is that you want to focus more into.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're in this master's program. Walk me through what it is that you like to study, specifically what you like to research, and kind of what your final project may or may not look like when leaving. I mean, we're in our second year, so we're at that end zone where we have to kind of
make up your mind.
Yeah.
For sure. Because I know a lot of people say when they come in, they're like, I don't know what my thesis will be about, you know? And that's true. And that's true until actually, like, the product is finished. Yeah. Because it'll evolve. All projects are supposed to evolve. That's kind of the point, especially of social sciences. It's a little bit more of an iterative process where you can change it as you're going through it.
Yeah.
So for me personally, I came in, I did think I was going to do a PhD program immediately after the master's program. I really only did it to get a little more experience, to make sure that sociology was the thing I wanted to get my PhD in, because I wasn't sure. I have a lot of love for a lot of the social sciences. So I came in and I was thinking I'm going to do a thesis, and I wanted to kind of merge my 3 areas of research interest. And one of those is identity formation, which I kind of talked about a little bit already. And then another is social justice. We don't really necessarily call it that in sociology. It's a little bit too much of a loaded term. But conflict theory, so more like, it's got a bad rap, but Marxist theory, which is a little bit more, us versus them, how we define who gets what resources in society. And then third, I have a really specific interest in cyber sociology, which is a very underdeveloped field at the moment, but sociology is definitely starting to get into the idea of things like artificial intelligence and social media and things like that, because it is definitely social, and although it doesn't feel like it, especially with artificial intelligence, there's definitely a bit of
oh no, it's super social.
But the way that we interact with artificial intelligence is social.
Yeah.
So whether it's interacting socially back is, barely part of the question, because our whole supposedly our entire purpose is to kind of define that human social behavior. So so I started the idea of a thesis project that I would do, which would be to sort of look at people who were struggling with mental health, like mental illness, and how beneficial they might think that something like artificial talk therapy would be through a home device, perhaps like a Google Home or something like that. They could just say, like, Alexa, let's talk. And she could become sort of, an open ear to listen to whatever problems you might be experiencing. And so I started this project, and a lot of my advisors were super into it. They loved the project. They loved the idea. They thought it was really unique. No one in my department is doing anything like that. No one in my department does anything related to cyber sociology, because it is so new. And then, like, I got through my first semester, and for some reason I didn't feel the project anymore, and I didn't feel a thesis anymore.
Yeah. That happens a lot.
Yeah. And it wasn't even necessarily like that I was like, oh, I just don't want to write the paper, because I've written, so many papers over the course of my undergraduate degrees anyways, because they're all paper heavy degrees. So
social sciences are paper heavy.
They're all paper heavy, yeah. So, but I didn't think I wanted to go on to a PhD anymore. Mm-hmm. And for me, there was a lot of pressure from other members of my family who are all very blessed and have all gotten PhDs. I'm the only, I'm the youngest, and I'm the only one right now who does not have a PhD. But there was a lot of pressure that they wanted me to go on and finish a PhD, even though I didn't necessarily think it was the right decision for me. Yeah. And I knew that if I went through with the thesis, my advisors were going to love it. They were going to say it was an excellent paper, and they were going to tell me that I needed to do a PhD program, and I didn't want to have that pressure of knowing that I'd done everything I needed to do to get into a PhD program. Yeah. So I backed off the thesis, and luckily my program offers like a practicum option.
Same.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So for those of you who don't know, practicum is basically like an internship. You have to work a certain number of hours, you have to gain experience in some subfield, and then you write a paper about the experience that you've gained and how it's like going to help move you closer to a career. And then you defend that. instead of defending a thesis. So I think that's now kind of the route that my advisors and I have jointly decided to pursue, because as much as I loved the idea for my original project, I think that we have to listen to ourselves in as far as what is best for us, because my advisors have my best intentions at heart. They really do.
Yeah.
But they don't know me the way that I know me.
Well, and I think too, there's a stipulation that we talk about a lot in our department. We have our practicum is more of like a capstone option, so it's project based, where you have to come up with like a tangible thing that you can take into the workforce, and then define it with theory, and that's that thing. So people will make like manuals for certain organizations for like them to use or implement. Some people will do like a podcast like this, where they do like 6 episodes that highlight a specific thing or whatever. And then, people who are considering a PhD and they're on the fence like you, they're like, well, I don't know, and I don't want to like overwork myself, so I want to take this other option. Mm-hmm. And we talk all the time about which one is more valid and which one makes more sense. And the thing is, like, going into a PhD program, like, it's okay to still have like a tangible thing to bring in. So if you get to the end and you're like, I think I still might want to do the PhD, like you aren't closing that door just because you didn't write a thesis. I think that pressure and that stigma that you have to write a thesis to be successful when you're going into a PhD program is just absolutely ridiculous. Because there are plenty of people who don't do that. It's less common, but I think it's growing part of the option to have a capstone or practicum whenever you're leaving as your exit project. So, you get to choose that for yourself, and you're absolutely right. You have to listen to yourself and figure out what is the best option for me, because the way that I do whatever I do is unique to my experience, and it's no one else's decision. And it's really nobody else's business. So you just have to make that decision for yourself. But I want you to know, that if you decide still to later go back, doing this option doesn't negate your opportunity to be able to do that.
I do think that's more and more the case. I completely agree. It's definitely growing in its validity as a way to prove that you've actually gone through a master's program and have that level of knowledge about the subject matter. I think, and this is a really unfortunate truth, I do think that sociology sort of lags behind other social sciences because we try so hard to stay objective, and we try so hard to align ourselves with hard sciences rather than all the social sciences. There's definitely, despite us being I think viewed from outside as a very progressive social science, we're not as progressive as some of the other social sciences. There's definitely people within the department that have very negative views of, for example, qualitative research, because it's not real science. And it's the same thing about theses though, is if you don't write a thesis, you're kind of pushing yourself outside of which isn't the case. Right.
This is a similar issue that we talk about a lot. I have a group of friends in this. That's what other Danny is in here as well. And she said that surprises me. It kind of surprises me too, because this is a conversation we actually have in communication a lot, where we consider ourselves similarly to be like, oh, well, it is kind of progressive, but we have a lot of people who don't think qualitative research is real. And we actually have a third method for research in our department that is called Interpretive Methods. And it's very different than quantitative or qualitative. And people will just straight up tell you to your face, like, that is not really, you're just getting to decide and say whatever. So I think that that's an issue where we all think each other is doing better and further ahead than our own departments are. And I think realistically, every department is going to have things that are really tough. And people will tell you in our department too, some professors will straight up say, if you don't write a thesis, then you've closed that PhD door. And so, just know that it's not just sociology. Our department struggles with those same things. And it's so infuriating when you can take the step away and see the truth or lack thereof in that conversation. But I think that's also just higher education, right? There's always, and the academy in general, this is something that comes up almost every episode. There's just such a gatekeeping nature to higher education and to research. And there's also such a personality of high ego, I'm better than you. If you don't do it my way, you're not doing it the right way. And it just really floods all of us who want to do it in the ways that are still acceptable, because it makes us feel inferior in a way. And I just I hate that. I hate that you're having to struggle with that. And I'm sure being in the unique situation where all of your family have PhDs, like
Yeah.
that pressure is probably 10 times higher, and I can't imagine
It
dealing
is.
with
It's
that.
a bit. Yeah, it's a bit. Especially a lot of people in my program, they're the very first person in their family that's gone for anything, you know, above a bachelor's. Some of them are the very first ones that even went for a bachelor's.
Yeah.
And you know, we talk about the pressure that they're going through being. It's sort of the whole family's looking at them as like the one shining star that's going to make it to the top, right? And I do think that that is incredibly, there's so much pressure associated with that, but it's a sort of pressure I can't comprehend.
Yeah.
Because I feel sometimes sort of like I'm standing at the bottom looking at everyone at the top, and they're like, so what's up?
Yeah,
Like, yeah.
Yeah, I think that the commonality there, as someone who, like, my parents, my grandparents, my aunts and uncles, like, I know one uncle has a master's degree, I think, and that's it, and it was in music education, so it was like, you know, it's very different.
Right.
But like outside of that one, I don't really know any close family that went on, and so I'm on that other side where I'm like, oh my gosh, like I said I was gonna do it, now I have to do it. Like, is that really how this goes? But like the one thing that we can share in that experience is like we don't want to disappoint anybody, right? Like you don't want to disappoint because you don't want to be the one that didn't do it, and I don't want to disappoint being the one that like I could have done it and I just like couldn't. I actually couldn't do it. You know, I feel that pressure. So you said that you aren't really sure about the PhD option, and you're kind of on the fence about that. And I think like most people, especially after that first semester of a master's, you're like, wait, is this really what it's gonna be like?
Especially during COVID.
Oh yeah.
I mean, that's a whole level as well of difficulty to any kind of master's program. Yeah. You're not meeting people face to face. You don't feel like you're forming those connections.
Yeah.
And every class was online, and
everything was online.
You know, as much as I hate to say it, like I thought it'd be easier because I was like, oh yeah, I write papers anyways, and that's all we're doing now is writing papers. But so much of my master's program, anyways, is not really about the paper. It's about physically being in class and having that sort of Socratic discussion between all of the people, and not getting to feel that because we're all, you know, through a camera on Zoom. It's awkward. It's like, when do I unmute myself to add my thoughts? You just can't read the room the same way. It's really difficult, honestly.
Yeah. You're thinking a lot more about other people and what they're doing or saying, and I think that that's just like such a struggle. And I did a master's student panel, I was telling you about this ahead of time, on Friday for our graduate support office, and one of the questions was like, what do professors expect of you in a master's program? And we talked a lot about, I specifically talked a lot about how like the expectation is complete discussion. Like you're showing up having read all the material, and unlike undergrad, like you can't skim because they're not lecturing you about it and telling you what happened and then you just kind of like add a little to it. You're telling them what happened, and then you as a collective unit are having a discussion about how that affects you and what you think, and like what are the things that are wrong with that thing. And it's such a different approach,
completely in like different format.
And in doing that on Zoom, it is different because it's just like any conversation, right? If you're at a party with a group of people and you're trying to talk, like you get the energy from that room, you're excited about it, you're formulating your thoughts differently, you're not thinking so much about like, when do I do this specific action? Whereas in Zoom, like you're not feeling that same coalition building that is so essential to how our brains work and process. So I'm glad you brought that up because I think that is one of the big challenges that we're trying to figure out how to be a graduate student, which is already a really difficult task.
And then during a time that makes it even difficult.
During a pandemic and during an online environment, like there were so many things that compounded us. But as you're sorting through that process, what do you think that you're going to do when you graduate? Do you think that you will just go straight into a workforce? Do you think that you will take a year off and work like a side job and then maybe reassess going into a PhD program, or then decide to get a career person? Like, what are you thinking right now will come from this master's?
So I'm thinking I want to like say, because I know some people were asking me, and I know that this is going to come up later in my personal life for anyone who does watch this. The goal for me never changed. I understand that I thought that the avenue to reach my goal would be a PhD program, but I no longer think that that's necessarily the case. So for me, my goal in getting a higher degree was always that I wanted to teach at a college level or above. I like education to me is like my actual passion. Yes, I love sociology. Yes, I love research, but for me, it doesn't mean anything if I can't share that passion with other people.
Yeah.
It just actually means nothing to me. So I always wanted to teach. And I thought that I would want to teach at a university, like a research university, sort of like the University of Arkansas. You know, you've got actually some serious research being produced at the University of Arkansas.
Yeah, we're an R1 school.
Absolutely.
So we're a top tier research institution.
Yes. So thought that always that was sort of the path for me. And then I got into the master's program, and some of the experience I was having in academia in general, some of that gatekeeping that you were talking about, and some of those attitudes, and especially, again, in disciplines that you would expect to be more forward-thinking or progressive.
Yeah.
Like sociology, for example, I took a social inequality seminar over the summer, and we spent an entire 2.5 hours talking about how gender isn't real at all, and actually neither is sex, like biological sex. And we just talked about this for 2.5 hours, and then at the very end of it, we said, which is kind of a sociology joke, the Thomas theorem states that things that aren't real can be real in their consequences. And so we were saying, you know, as much as we're saying gender doesn't matter, obviously if discrimination is still happening on the basis of gender, it still feels real to the people who are experiencing that discrimination.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about it, like, as soon as I turn off my Zoom webcam, right, because that's still how we're doing classes until the fall.
Yeah.
I walked away from the computer and I thought, like, everybody in the sociology discipline, like, agrees gender is not real. It makes no sense to discriminate against certain people based on gender. And yet sociology is a male-dominated field. And I have had men in sociology. In fact, I had an experience in undergrad where I walked into social data and analysis, which is our, like, social statistics kind of course, and it was only guys in the room, and they looked at me and said, do you mean to be in here, because journalism is actually across the hall?
Mm-mm.
And I said, is this like sociology, social statistics? And they were like, yeah. And I was like, then this is where I'm meant to be. And it kind of stuck with me, and now I think it's hysterical because that's the course I teach, but but those experiences do happen. So even though, like, we're also progressive in our thinking of, like, gender isn't real, like, we teach that, you know, those kids had already taken that class. Like, we're all already on the same page of that. But it's not just, you know, undergraduate students that have that. It's definitely graduate students. It's faculty. It's tenured faculty that all share those kinds of ideas of, can a woman do this as well as I can?
Danny says, OMG. Yes. Oh my gosh. Yeah. I actually, you know, I always get a shocked expression when I hear things like that, but then I'm like, why? Because I experienced similar issues, not in my schooling experience, but in an internship that I had, and it was, you know, with a somewhat sports-based institution, so it shouldn't be also that surprising. Mm-hmm. But it's like when, like you said, when you experience something like that, it's always great in a discussion to create this like utopian perspective of like, this isn't a thing anymore, and like we don't struggle with this, and like you just see it on the news, like you just see it on it happens to other people, and you kind of place yourself in this like distance from it until it happens to you, and then you're shocked, and then you think about it later, and you're like, why was I shocked? Like, there's a reason this is a discussion that we're having. And it's because it's a continued issue that is going on. And I like the way that you put it is like, we can have that discussion and we can have that understanding together. But in reality, like the people who are experiencing it, it's very real for them. Mm-hmm. And I really liked the way that you put that, because we talk about it all the time. Like we were having a conversation, and Danny in the chat will know this. We have a group chat with some of the other students in our program, and we call each other the babes. And Toby is also in this chat. She's been lovingly accepted into this little group of ours. And one of the things we were talking about today was the discussion about the term mid-size when you're talking about women and their clothing, and there was a lot of conversation about like, okay, is this like actually something that is offensive? Is it actually something that's like a way to be included in body positivity movement and being fatphobic at the same time? And you know, it's kind of a hard conversation to have because everybody has different perspectives. And I think when you say it like that, you know, when I was talking to them earlier, I was like, I don't think that it's meant to be discriminatory. As someone who has like been typically described as mid-size, like I walk into any store and I can find my size, but it doesn't fit me right. I can I'm going to a plus size store and I'm like the smallest or the
Right,
second smallest
right.
size. So I'm that person that would fit that category. But I didn't really think about the fact that, like, for some people, it really could be that they're saying that because they don't want to be considered, you know, fat. And I'm like, well, but I am. So, like, that's where we're at. So for me, I didn't think about that. But it's the same thing, right? When
Yeah.
it comes to
Oh,
gender,
yeah.
or it comes to race, or it comes to sex, or it comes to religion, it never seems that big of a deal when you're having an academically based objective attempt conversation until you're in that moment, and then you find yourself shocked because education has kind of worked through, like, we have theories about this, but we're talking about it in an objective perspective, and it kind of gatekeeps your own mind, and then you find yourself in that situation.
So
like, what
this is definitely something that I talk about a lot in identity formation, and it's something that I'm gonna use to circle kind of back to answering your question from earlier, which is, so where does this take me? You know?
This is how this always goes.
Right. Oh yeah, we just circle. But so there's such a difference between an ideological assertion and an actual incorporation of the theory that you're talking about. And that happens to everybody, right? Like, you can say, yes, gender is 100% fake. Like, it's not real. There's no basis for it. But clearly we are still acting as though gender were real. And so that is what I think is happening in academia as well. And I think that it's the thing that really threw me off of academia as I thought of it, because I thought of it as a very, like, open and accepting institution. Definitely from my perspective as an undergraduate student with excellent professors that I never had any sort of problems with. Like, I always thought that it was all about diversity, inclusion, accepting, you know, multiple perspectives, and trying to sort of find peace when, even if you can't 100% agree with each other, you can at least find common ground. And because that's the experience you have as an undergraduate most times, especially in social science courses. So I definitely thought academia would be like that. And then I got into a little bit of the backstage of it, and I saw that it's not that way. And I had experiences with professors that were now vastly different than the experiences I had as an undergraduate student. Especially with me, knowing that I wanted to be teaching. There are two sort of, like, graduate assistantships you can take on, and everyone in my department has a graduate assistantship. So you could be a research assistant or a teaching assistant, and I made it really clear from the beginning I wanted to be a teaching assistant because I want to teach, so that's good experience for me. And they said, "Are you sure?" And I said, "Why'd you say it like that?" And they said, "Well, no one ever wants to be a teaching assistant." And I was like, "Oh, okay, interesting. Well, I do." And then I had the experience of TAing a 500 student course in general sociology, because they just decided, since it was a Zoom class, they put everybody into one section, and it was 500 students. And we'd only ever done 100 max before that, so it was a little bit difficult.
Was it just you?
I was the only TA for the course.
But was there a full...
There was a full professor.
Okay.
But I was, like, the only TA grading everything and sending out reminder emails, all that stuff.
Yeah.
Really difficult. And my professor told me very regularly that I needed to stop caring so much about the success of my students, because I would reach out to them more times than was minimally required of me. And I
heard that over the last year as well.
I definitely gave them chances. That they said it was entirely up to me if I should give them another chance or not. And so every time I would give them another chance, because, like, you know, especially with it being the pandemic, I wanted to take that as loosely as possible, because you don't know what someone's home experience is. I definitely had students that I didn't think were performing as well as they could, and then they would say, like, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. It's just, like, I have an infant, and they have been, like, screaming, crying, sick all night. We've been at the hospital for 3 days straight." I don't want to, like, take something away from someone, because that's an experience they wouldn't have necessarily had to go through if the class was held on campus. And so, but yeah, I had professors tell me, don't care so much. And it was the most shocking thing I think I'd ever heard, because I was like, then this isn't for me. Because if you expect me to care more about barely checking those boxes and doing my research that is apparently much more important than all of these students' education, like, we don't prioritize the same things.
Yeah.
So I sort of talked to my advisors about this, a couple of them that, like, very personally have been there for me in meaningful ways. Like, throughout the pandemic, I've had a couple of just, like, really crazy, really, serious kind of traumatic events in my life over the last couple of years, and they've been there through all of them. They, like, know the backstory, they know what's going on with me all the time. And they kind of, guided me through it, and they said, well, if all you want to do is teach, and you want to teach and you want to make, like, a real difference, what you might consider doing is teaching at a school that less privileged students can attend. And if that means a community college or a liberal arts school, then that's where you should be looking.
Yeah.
And you only need a master's degree for that. And I went, ding. So that's what I'd like to do. Yeah. After I finish the master's program, if I have to take a year or two and kind of figure out where to settle, I'll definitely do that. But I do not see myself, like, continuing into a PhD program unless it becomes an issue that I would need that degree to teach.
Yeah, I think in my experience, having similar conversations of, like, I think I would like to teach, but I'm just not sure how I want to go about doing that. I think some of the best advice, a couple of things that came to mind through all of that conversation. I had an advisor from my undergrad that I reached out to. I did not go here for undergrad. I went to a different institution, so I had to kind of really reach back out to them. And they said, if you're going to be sensitive about the things that people do or say in higher education, like, the academy is one of the most critical and judgmental places that you could ever be in, especially as a young woman.
Yes.
And this is, like, an older white male. Like, he was like, I can't even handle some of the things people say. And like you said, he knows everything about me, and he was like, this is going to be the most challenging thing, and I know you, and this is going to be the hardest thing you have to overcome. Because the reality is, like, people tend to be here for themselves, and they want to put their name out there and get as many publications as they can, and the students are, the teaching is the way that they can do that. And so, that's the hardest part of it. But the other thing that I've been told is we don't get a reality check about how many jobs are available after you graduate with a master's or a PhD. I had a professor that I took a class with over the summer, and one of the things that she told us was, like, look, when I graduated, there were over 100 people across the U.S. who graduated with the exact same degree as me, and 4 of us got jobs, and 4 of us are the ones who've stayed in the academy, and the rest of them, there was nothing for them, and they've had to go find something else to do. And I think that, that really put a checkpoint for me, and I'll share this with you just because you're kind of you're a little bit more determined to not do PhD than I am. I think you're a little further along in that process. I'm sure we'll get there. But, for me, it was like, well, I mean, if that's the case, I've asked a couple of other people since. They were like, yeah, we don't tell students that enough. You just have to be aware that, like, you go wherever the jobs are. So you probably won't get to stay in Arkansas. I know there are some people who, even in my life, are just dead set that they're going to graduate and get a job right here and not have to move their lives, and they'll just get exactly what they want. And the academy just isn't that way. Like, it's very rare, and, like, if you can do it, like, amazing, congratulations, like, I'm so happy for you. But like I'm glad that you said, like, if I have to figure out where I'm going to settle, that's where I'm going to settle. My husband and I have talked about this a lot. He is seeking a PhD right now, and we're both like, not only 1 PhD but 2 PhDs. Like, this is going to make it a challenge for us to figure out where to go and how to do it. But if it's what you want to do, like, you'll find a way to make it work.
I agree.
But I do think, like, a community college is such a great way for you to make that tangible difference, because a lot of times the people that go there, they don't know what they want to do, they don't know where they want to go, and they need someone who's going to be willing to put that kind of time and effort into them. And you won't have the obligation of, like, you have to publish 2 or 3 papers a year.
Every single year. Yeah.
So I'm glad that you are kind of aware of that. It sounds like you have some excellent advisors who are mentoring you, and I think that that's very lucky because they're very hard to find.
I agree.
I'm kind of, I think because just of COVID and not having gone here as an undergrad, I'm kind of having to rely on, like, my undergraduate people at a different institution a little bit. Thankfully, they're amazing, and I've found a couple people now. But I've definitely heard some of the same things that you have mentioned here about just, like, stop caring so much about your students. Like, you can't save them all. And it's like, but damn it, I'm going to try. Like, that's what I'm supposed to do. But we're just graduate students. What do we know, So.
If I had a dime for every
time. Yeah. we're all in this together. But I'm really glad that you kind of had that conversation with some people who really are willing to invest in you in that way, and also have that conversation with yourself, because I think that's the hardest moment, is when you realize like, oh, there really is no clean cut way to do this, and I'm probably gonna lose no matter really what I do. So I just have to figure out what's the least losing way and the best way I can still support myself and care about who I am.
Right. And I definitely, I call it my contingency plan list, but I'm the kind of person who has a plan B, C, D, E through Z, and I've definitely thought of, let's say I decide that I love this place and I want to be here, and there's just no teaching jobs, which is a very real possibility. You're so right. There's so few teaching jobs, right?
Yeah.
And so I've definitely thought about those things, and luckily for me, I have so many interests, and I have at least several skill sets from being in plenty of social sciences that at any point I could really just change trajectories and go, more like political campaigning routes, or like there's just a lot of doors open for me, which I really tried to do in my undergrad, because you don't know how life will go, and I feel like the more that we've lived through these last couple of years, the more that I believe I'm correct with that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, if I needed proof that we just don't know what'll happen, look at the past, 5 years.
I know, I'm like literally the economy craziness, the jobs craziness, the do we recycle, do we not recycle craziness, the massive global pandemic that was here, and then it kind of went, and now it's back. Like, we just don't know. You're right. Life is so crazy, and we just have no idea what to expect. But I'm glad that you have thought about several different plans and options. I think that I'm in a place where, for the first time, I'm kind of I've hit all of my boxes, and I don't know which one it will be, and I don't have an option if they don't work.
Right.
And I've been in a little bit of a professional crisis the past few weeks or whatnot, and especially I don't know, you and I, like I said, we really haven't had a chance to just sit and talk about our lives very much, but I took 2 years and I worked full time from undergrad to grad. I didn't come straight into grad school, and I worked in admissions, which means that my whole job was to understand the data of where higher education is going. And I think that scares me a little bit more, because we're already seeing a trend of people aren't going to college as much anymore, and not only are they not going to college as much anymore, but they're substituting it for trade schools. And the population is also heavily declining. So we already see a 5-year trajectory, and this is when I started my job, which was 3 years ago. So we're really coming up on that 5 years where we're going to start seeing higher education institutions close because they can't meet the numbers that they need to meet, which means those jobs that we already are struggling to find are starting to disappear even more. And so I'm glad that you have some backup plans. I'm a little more stressed about it because I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm definitely higher education bound, but I think I've just moved into more maybe administrative roles are better for me, which is totally fine.
So. Nothing wrong with that.
That's so crazy that you're studying things that overlap a little bit with what I'm doing. I look at public health on new media and the messages that go with that. So I would be interested sometime to sit down and talk about some of our projects and ideas and get some feedback from you.
Oh yes, I'd be 100% into it.
Yeah, we've got a lot in common. I'd be interested to chat about it more. But thanks for being here.
Of course.
I hope you enjoyed it. It's a lot easier than it seems like at the very beginning.
I think it's just a little weird. For me, right? Okay, so from my perspective, I'm sitting down with someone, I have met you, I think, twice before. For very brief encounters, where we were exclusively talking about one thing and not necessarily talking about ourselves. And then so here I am. You approached me about being about the podcast, and I said the podcast is a great idea, and I really do think that, because I don't think that we have enough. As graduate students, we're sort of dissuaded from talking to other graduate students, right?
Yeah, we kind of are.
Because they don't really want you to necessarily know that some of the bad experiences you're having are not just about you. They're not just, an unfortunate series of events that have happened to you. In fact, they're sort of institutional, and it seems to happen to a lot of people. So there's not really many opportunities for us to sit down together and talk about it, especially cross-discipline. They try to stick you with your one cohort, and they're suffer together and then go forth.
Good luck. Yeah, that's what this is for. It's just a space for us to nerd out about the things that we like to study and talk about how we got here and show people like there's a million ways to get to
a million paths into and out of upper education. I really
to
feel.
everything, right? To everything. To the people I've had on the podcast are in their 40s and they're getting their masters and they're like, I just came straight from my undergraduate degree, and people are like, wait, you can wait for like 20 something years? It's like, hell yeah, you can.
Yes,
like,
you can.
There's no one way to do it, and you know. Again, this is a perfect example. There's two disciplines right here. Yep. Two disciplines that study essentially the exact same thing. Yes. But because like one text message that says, hello, I work in higher education and I love my job, that looks very different for you as a research study than it does for me. But it's the exact same like thing, the same news article, the same. Oh yeah,
Twitter, we could study the exact same material and come up with completely different results at the end of it.
Yeah,
and we're looking through different lenses.
I think that's just like so cool. I think that's so cool, and I want to find more people to come on here that talk about the same things I do in a completely different way. Just because like. How cool is it that there are hundreds of disciplines out there and literally half of us could be looking at exactly the same news article and talking about it?
I really definitely do think that that's also probably the way that research is going. You see more and more cross-disciplinary studies, and as you see that, it's like so low-key threatening. One of my professors called it low-key threatening. He was like, and then afterwards, by the way, he said, "Is that what low-key means?"
Yeah.
So, which I loved, but you know, because and it is a little bit because you know, before all of our disciplines sort of branched from each other.
Yeah.
There was a real serious moment where they almost all became one discipline. And it's still very possible that that happens in the future because we all do study the exact same thing, really.
In different ways.
Just in different ways.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, one day you're going to go to school and it'll just be social science.
And and that'll be it. And you won't have to worry about, well, what's sociology versus anthropology versus, you know, psychology. And it's like, well, you know, there were different people who at one point wanted to call them different things because they wanted to feel special.
Yeah.
So that's your answer.
I do think they are fundamentally different because we do look at different aspects of the same things and they all contribute in new and unique ways.
Yeah.
But
I definitely would call it like a lens difference.
Yeah. I think it's a lot like.
But it's really interesting.
Too. Yeah. Well, thanks for being here.
Of course.
I appreciate it. Thank you for all joining us. I've seen the numbers of people joining in and out has spiked quite a bit here and there. So thank you if you stuck around the whole time. We appreciate you. If you missed any portion of the podcast, this has been recorded and will be uploaded to our YouTube channel. It's just called Academic Yak on YouTube. The logo that you see here on this channel is the same as the one on YouTube. We also have a Twitter account. It is at yak_pod, where we post upcoming episodes. We have a couple more episodes that are already planned out, and we're super excited about them coming up the next couple weekends. If you're interested and you are a graduate student currently or within 5 years of graduating from a master's or PhD program and working full-time in higher education, and you want to maybe be on the podcast, reach out. We have a Gmail account that is academicyakpod@gmail.com, and we'd love to hear from you. Thanks for being here. Special thanks to my husband, who's behind the camera running all of our technology today, and to Emma's partner for coming out and supporting us today in the background as well. We love you guys. We hope to see you on Friday when we have our next podcast guest, whose name is also Danny. So we will see you guys for a Danny Duo podcast on Friday. And until then, we'll hope you have a great week. Thanks.